Oh, hey guys, good to see you here. Thanks for your patience. What do we have here? We have a Amazon package, and we have this book, Fred and Rose West. And don't laugh, but after this package arrived, I was like, okay, great. And then I didn't actually realize there was another book that I'd actually ordered, and it was this one, Elvis and Me. And I must say, the first chapter is a page turner. So I'm really going to be getting stuck into this sort of it says here the phenomenal #1 bestseller. It definitely does have a compelling aspect to it. Definitely is written quite well. So I've got quite a few things lined up for you guys. So I do recommend this book. This book I haven't really gotten past the first paragraph, which is not a good sign, but we'll see how it goes. We are going to go into the scout mindset. We're going to deal with another section to it, and I promise you it's going to be worth it. It's going to be interesting. You may actually find this book even more interesting. It's called Being Wrong, right? Catherine Schultz, highly recommend this book. I think I read this book 5 years ago. Excellent book. Then I don't recommend this book. I don't recommend this book. I do recommend this book. It's Flatwater Tuesday by Ron Irwin. I've actually met the author. He's from America, living in South Africa. He's a lecturer at the University of Cape Town. He's actually invited me to lecture his students, and we may actually have him on as a guest at some point. I'm going to read you an excerpt out of this book, basically saying or highlighting good writing. I'm going to read you an excerpt out of this book, and you can decide for yourself what you think about it. Okay, so let's see who we've got here. Amy Hall, Sokoi Cat, Roses Are Red, Zenaida, good to see you all. Les Brown, Helen Fenner, Karina in Austria, good to see you. I've got a question for Mel Stiller, good to see you as well. I've got a question for Pauline. I saw a comment Pauline left, where she said that, I don't know whether it's tongue in cheek or whether you mean it, but Pauline said Slaughter was the best book I've ever read next to War and Peace. Good vibes. Is that true? Like, I don't know whether you are being serious or not. Pauline, can you tell us a little bit more about that? When did you read it? Is that how you really feel, etc., etc.? I'm also actually going to take you guys through probably the review that hurts me the most and the review that upsets me the most. It's the same one, and that's related to Slaughter. So we'll come back to that. Little Dove says, "Hi, True Rocket Science. How can I buy the book and join your book club?" I'm not sure which book you're referring to. Are you talking about Slaughter? Slaughter is this book. I'm going to talk to you guys in a little bit more detail about this book, there's quite a lot of history in a way behind it. So I will be doing that. Should I move a bit like that? There we go. Let's have a look at some of your new comments. Pauline says, "Being serious, true. I read it several years ago while still living in California. I felt like it was a movie while reading it." Pauline, I don't know if you know this, but it is ranked 2.6 out of 5. It's one of my worst ranked books. So do you remember if you reviewed the book? If you didn't, please do review it. It definitely needs some reviews by people who've read it and who've liked it. So make sure you do if you haven't. Yvette says, "Looking forward to this one. Best regards to all." Okay. Lady Amalthea says, "I'm here because you mentioned Slaughter. I thought it was a very good book." Wow, I really appreciate that. Really appreciate that. Slaughter, should I start off briefly just by talking about that? Slaughter probably took the most out of me as an author of all the books that I wrote. It was the most costly, the most draining, the most difficult book, I think, by far to write. Ironically, the last books that I wrote were also quite difficult. And what I find is really bizarre is the books that I've struggled to write, I feel are my best books. So where I feel like it's hard going and it's difficult and I'm not happy, those books tend to be very well done. It's quite strange. It's strange to come out on the other side, which is also why it's like adds insult to injury getting that book reviewed so badly. Like I think it's I think it's my best, one of my best achievements in true crime, if not the best. I think The Murder of Vincent Van Gogh is top three. I think Chris Watts' Post Truth is also one of my better achievements. I think Christmas Star is one of my best books, but Slaughter is definitely, I feel like, probably my best effort. The most effort I put into a single book, um, true crime book. I've written fiction that has been even harder. But Pauline says I did review it at the time. Okay, thanks a lot for that. I do hope that there's going to be at least a handful of you guys here who, if we talk a little bit more about that book, that you're going to read it. And because I feel like it doesn't deserve the rating that it has. I don't know what Pauline thinks. I mean, Pauline's just said it's the best book I've ever read besides Law and what War and Peace. The rating definitely doesn't align with that, right? So that's what I think we're gonna go through the scout mindset right now and then being wrong. I just want to, again, if you're new here, I just want to recommend this book. I've just read the first chapter. It was a real page turner. It just gives a very personal view. But what's quite interesting is there's some contradictions already in this book to the one by Albert, what was his name? Goldman. It's quite interesting that the narrative here actually contradicts his, and you kind of got to ask yourself, who's right? What's actually the true story? So again, you have a kind of a counter narrative, not really that, but a different perspective. Amy says, "Forgive me, Nick. I'm asking for the author of Slaughter." Well, it's me. I wrote it. It's this book. Let me bring it up. It's that book. Elizabeth, have you read Elvis and Me? Margaret Zabinski says that Priscilla Presley book is really good. Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Lady Amalthea. I appreciate it. Okay. Victoria says, I'm definitely going to read it and I will leave a review. So I'm going to come back to the sort of circumstances around writing this book. And anyway, we'll come back to it. I want to sort of kick off now by referring to this book, which is a fairly recent book recommendation in the true crime rocket science community. I brought it up quite often in the Summer Wells case, so it's kind of been with us in terms of our discussion for about the past year. So it's not really that long. So due to popular demand, you guys asked for it. So I'm now going to read to you guys from page 154 in a chapter titled Lean into Confusion, right? And we're basically going to just deal with 2 pages. There's also another section in the chapter Lean into Confusion. It's the mystery of the irrational negotiator. Now, what I want you to think about when we're reading this, so it's a scout mindset, but it's in a specific area, confusion. I want you to think about what the author, and her name is Julia Galef, right? Julia Galef, great book. Why some people see things clearly and others don't, right? I want you to think about the Kylie Rodney case as we go through these thoughts, ideas, concepts, right? Just let the words wash over you, but think about where we are right now in the Kylie Rodney case as we go through this. So I'm reading, looks like I've got two pens. I'm reading, and it's quite an ironically titled section, The Unexpected Alien Attack, right? So listen to, this is from page 154. Quote, in the 16th episode of Star Trek, the original series' first season, the Starship Enterprise's shuttle has just crash landed on a hostile alien planet. Spock is in command and he decides on a plan. The Enterprise crew will fire off a few warning shots to show off their superior weaponry, and the aliens will realize they're outmatched and retreat. Now, just to be clear, I'm sure many of you know this, but let me just be explicit. Spock is Amy Carter says Slaughter isn't coming up on the first few pages of Amazon search. Let me help you out. Let me just quickly do that. Can you see the full title there? That's the full title. Okay, is that going to help you out? I'll put a link again in chat. I did a few moments ago, but here it is again. I hope that helps you. So that is exactly what I was trying to get at, Karina. Thank you. Spock is a logician, is logical, he's sensible, he's also very smart, he's very, very clever. Can clever people make mistakes? Can logic get you into trouble? And how can it get you into trouble? So let's have a look. So let me just review. The Enterprise kind of crash lands on an alien planet, and Spock basically says, we need to fire a few warning shots to show off that we're superior, and the aliens will realize they're outmatched and retreat. Now, that in a way makes me think of AWP coming into true crime and saying, we're going to fire off a few shots and show that you guys are all outmatched compared to us. We are going to set the tone for this. And also, you guys need to respect us. So we're going to dominate this playing field. Just think about it like that. So, but that is not how things play out in that scenario. Instead, the aliens are angered by the Enterprise's display of aggression, and they attack, killing two crew members. The ship's Dr. McCoy berates Spock for his failed plan. Now, listen to the following. So this is quoting from the actual TV series, the actual dialogue. McCoy, well, Mr. Spock, they didn't stay frightened very long, did they? Spock, most illogical reaction. When we demonstrated our superior weapons, they should have fled. McCoy, you mean they should have respected us? Spock, of course. McCoy, Mr. Spock, respect is a rational process. Did it ever occur to you that they might react emotionally with anger? Spock, Doctor, I'm not responsible for their unpredictability. McCoy, they were perfectly predictable. To anyone with feeling, you might as well admit it, Mr. Spock. Your precious logic brought them all down on us. Did you guys get that? So the author then goes on to say, there, see what happens when you try to be logical. People die. Just kidding. Spock wasn't actually being logical. He was too attached to his model of how people should think, according to him. Think about that in the context of the Kylie Rodney case. Too attached to a model of how people should think, according to him. to pay attention to how they actually do think. Presumably, Spock has had many interactions with other non-Vulcans in the years before this event, and many opportunities to notice that their behaviors follow different rules than he expects. Why hasn't he learned from those experiences and improved his ability to predict how people will behave? Because when someone's behavior violates his expectations, he shrugs and he says, well, that was illogical to them, and doesn't try to understand what is missing. So, in other words, what this is getting at is when someone does something, think about it within the true crime community, or someone says something, think about it in the true crime community, that's confusing to you, that you don't agree with, instead of judging it and saying it's irrational, it's not rational, it's illogical, ask yourself instead another question. What am I missing? Not what are they missing? What am I missing? What am I missing about this situation? So now we're on page 156. Spock's reaction is a textbook example of one of Tetlock's 7 belief system defenses we learned about in chapter 10. Previously, we examined the I was almost right defense. Here, Spock is employing what Tetlock calls the politics is hopelessly cloud-like defense. When a forecaster's confident prediction doesn't come true, they shrug and say something like, well, this stuff is unpredictable. If this represented a lasting update towards agnosticism, that would be one thing. But somehow, when it comes time to make the next forecast, the forecaster is once again confident in their ability to predict global politics. So think about that in the context of this, and then you go into the next true crime case, and your confidence at prediction and analysis hasn't been it hasn't been weakened at all. In your mind, it hasn't been diminished whatsoever. So anyway, this is the part that I've highlighted midway through page 156. Quote, if you want to become better at predicting people's behavior, then shrugging off the times when they violate your expectations is exactly the wrong response, right? Now, think about that in the context of the real world and us, and think about it also in the context of you are investigating a case and you are predicting, I guess, suspects, you're red flagging suspects, you are, what's the word? You are, I don't want to say witch hunting, but you're basically investigating a case the way you investigate a case. Now think about that idea that you're trying to predict whether someone was a criminal or whether what the outcome is, who could be responsible. What happens when your prediction doesn't turn out, when it violates your expectations, when you're basically wrong? So let me just read that again. If you want to become better, in other words, if you want to become, I guess, a true crime rocket scientist, if you want to become better in your analysis at predicting people's behavior, then shrugging off the times when they violate your expectations is exactly the wrong response. You don't shrug it off. You confront it. You address it. Spock should have leaned in to his confusion about the aliens' decision to attack and said, what am I missing? Why might their behavior make sense to them, right? And often in cases like this, I would say, I'm talking about Kylie Rodney, John Benet Ramsey, other cases as well, Amanda Knox. Don't investigate the case from your perspective, investigate it from their perspective. Think about the John Benet Ramsey case from the perspective of child psychology. Think about the Amanda Knox case from the perspective of student psychology. Think about the Kylie Rodney case from the perspective of senior psychology. Not your psychology, their psychology. Then the last section here, she writes, in fact, there are many reasons why a nation might choose to attack despite being outmatched. This has got application in the war for Ukraine. This has got application in trying to apply this, the Scout mindset, to what's happening right now on the ground in Russia and in Ukraine. So listen to this. And remember, Putin is trying to do exactly this: intimidate, gain respect by a show of force. Do you think that's going to work? So listen to the following. There are many reasons why a nation might choose to attack despite being outmatched, and academics and military strategists have thought long and hard about why. Political scientist Bruce Bueno de Mesquita catalogued conflicts between nation states between 1816 and 1974 and found that 22% of the conflicts were cases in which a weaker nation attacked a stronger one. 22%, that's around about 1 out of 5. In some cases, the weaker side simply had more at stake. In other cases, they were counting on allies to back them up. There's even the madman strategy: show yourself to be an unpredictable actor with no instinct for self-preservation and hope that the enemy decides it's too risky to tussle with you. Understanding factors like these can make the difference between being unprepared for a future attack or caught dangerously off guard. Quite interesting. Jody is cool. Good to have you here. Robbie Robbins says, gosh, this is eerie. America True Crime, good to see you. Enforcing boundaries, which is a balancing act. Okay. E. Caroline, hi from Midcoast, Maine. Good to have you here. Jody School says, I love the Scout mindset. Yeah, I think a lot of us do. Okay. Little Dove says, can I join the book club and what book do I need to buy and where do I get it? First time here. So, Little Dove, how can I put this? Right now, it's not about buying a book and that makes you a member. At the moment, you are being invited to join a conversation amongst the True Crime Rocket Science community. So you kind of here by association. The book club is probably going to become members only at a certain point. It might be 5 episodes in, it might be 10 episodes in, we'll see. It depends kind of on you guys. If you guys decide, can you talk about that book of yours? So my community asked me to talk about this book, which is what we're doing. And some of my members have this book. So that's kind of how it came about. Obviously, some book club episodes are going to be about books that I've written. I mean, ostensibly, right? So that's kind of the idea. So right now, there's not some like a formal arrangement how you become a member. You watch these episodes when they come up, and you welcome to take the recommendations to heart. You can buy the books that I recommend. This is one of the books I recommend, and I didn't write it, and I'm not being paid to recommend it. I like the book, and I think it's worth recommending. We're also going to do it from your side, where you guys say, I've been reading this book right now, I think it's great. Or I'm reading this book right now, and I don't really think it's worth reading. And someone else might say, well, I think it is worth reading. So we really are book enthusiasts, reading enthusiasts. Some of us are also writers, and some of us are readers and writers, I guess, right? That's the idea. Let's have a look at some more of your comments. Jessica Lynn says, just tuned in. What are you all reading? We're reading The Scout Mindset, right? Brian Rush says, I really like your work. Thanks a lot for that. So I'm now going to read another section from The Scout Mindset. Then we're going to go to Being Wrong. So if I recommend this book, I really recommend this one as well. I think this is really a fantastic book. It really helped me. Anyway, we're going to go to that book in a moment. So now we're going to deal with the mystery of the irrational negotiator. Again, this is from the chapter Lean into Confusion in the Scout Mindset. Let's just see how long this is. I think it's just over a page. Okay. So again, I want you to kind of open your minds and think about where we are as a true crime community with specifically the Kylie Rodney case, and just think about these thoughts and ideas and where they take you, right? The mystery of the irrational negotiator, right? Also think about the war for Ukraine in the context of these thoughts. So let's get going. It's page 157. Quote, I didn't tell that story, meaning the one about Spock, as an excuse to pick on Spock again. Well, not just for that reason. The instinct to judge other people's behavior as stupid, irrational, or crazy is very common, and it's also a sign that there's something you're missing. This is a point that top negotiators all emphasize. Don't write off the other side as crazy. When their behavior confuses you, lean into that confusion. Treat it as a clue. You'll often find that it leads you to the information you need to resolve the negotiation. Negotiation experts Max Bazerman and Deepak Malhotra at Harvard Business School describe in their book Negotiation Genius the case of an executive whose company was being sued by a disgruntled former employee. The ex-employee claimed the company owed him $130,000 in commissions he had earned before he was fired. The company did the math and found that the employee was mistaken. They sent him the analysis showing that he was not owed any money, but he still refused to abandon his lawsuit. Now, for the last paragraph on this page, the executive, who was a client of Deepak Malhotra's, thought the employee was being completely irrational since he had no chance of winning in court. Right? So this case goes to court. But Malhotra suggested, is it possible that he doesn't trust your accountant? He urged the executive to try hiring an objective third-party accounting firm to do the analysis and send the results directly to the ex-employee. Sure enough, the suit was dropped. Chris Voss used to be the FBI's lead international kidnapping negotiator. In his best-selling book on negotiation, Never Split the Difference, he stresses the importance of leaning in to confusion. This is the part that I've underlined. This is the part that I want to emphasize here. And this is quoting from Chris Voss, quoting from his book, Never Split the Difference. It is when we hear or see something that doesn't make sense, something crazy, that a crucial fork in the road is presented. So what I'm trying to say here, certainly what she's trying to say, is when like we keep asking ourselves in true crime, does that make sense? In other words, we're saying we've made a particular argument, and does that make sense? Kind of saying it does make sense, doesn't it? But the same applies in reverse. When you come up against something that doesn't make sense, instead of judging it, instead of dismissing it, lean into it and say, what is going on here? Right? In other words, understand why it doesn't make sense. Don't just understand things that do make sense. Also try to understand why something doesn't make sense. In other words, why does something not make sense? Does that make sense? Are you following? Right? So he writes, push forward even more forcefully into that which we initially can't process or take the other path, the one to guaranteed failure, in which we tell ourselves that negotiating was useless anyway. So I've written a note here. Don't stop at it doesn't make sense. Ask why until it does. So I'm talking about when this is really a reference to certain other people and certain other people's opinion. When it doesn't make sense, ask why it doesn't make sense, and try and understand why you think it doesn't make sense instead of just dismissing it. Otherwise, you will always remain in a binary opposition, right? So that is as far as I'm taking the scout mindset. There's so much other things to address in here, but I really recommend you go and read this book. I feel like what I'm going to deal with now in being wrong is much more powerful analysis. I'm not trying to say Being Wrong is a better book, just that what we're going to deal with in this book. So it's Being Wrong, right? And it says Adventures in the Margin of Error, and it's by Catherine Schultz, right? This is a book I highly, highly recommend, and you can see it's full of notes and that sort of thing. So we're going to go to a chapter titled Heartbreak, and we're going to page 271, and I think we're going to be dealing with quite a few pages, but I'm going to try and just deal with the highlights. You can see I've sort of highlighted quite a few things there, underlined and so on. What I love about this book is it addresses the issue of reality and being wrong about reality, and how we deal with being wrong in our own reality. So that's why I found it really interesting. So I'm going to I'd love to read all of this, but I'm going to just touch on a couple of things. So we're on page 270 from Being Wrong. So I'm just going to jump in. I'm not going to give you too much context. Quote, "There's a kind of collusion in romantic love not to breach reality. So when two different realities finally do enter the picture, there's a real competition for who has the truth. You get a kind of turf war. I'm right. No, I'm right. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. People get anxious because suddenly they feel that their vision of the world is under attack, and they resort to anger, which is the attempt to get someone else to surrender their reality to you so you don't have to surrender yours." Now, it's a very interesting scenario where you have people who are in love with one another, people in a relationship with one another, people who ostensibly like one another. And then they find that in the beginning, especially in that initial phase of being in love, there's a kind of a collusion where both sides say, I'm going to kind of suspend my critical thinking about this and about you, and maybe even about myself. I'm going to suspend my disbelief about certain things, and I'm going to kind of float on a cloud with you, and we're going to collude in terms of reality to not breach reality. In other words, we're going to float in a kind of cloud because it's so nice and it's so fun, and we're both going to agree without signing a contract, without explicitly talking about it. We're going to both float in a kind of a cloud, basically for as long as we can, and we're going to just sort of roll with it and enjoy it, and hope that feeling lasts forever. And I just love the way she describes it. Catherine Schultz describes it as a collusion not to breach reality. Think about those words in the context of the Kylie Rodney case. A collusion that's taking place, also out of a kind of romantic, not really romantic, what's the word? A kind of hero worship that's going on. I don't want to break that lovely, warm and fuzzy feeling of attachment and belonging I've got with this or that community. And so let's collude not to breach reality. And then you have the situation when ultimately that reality does announce itself. It is breached. So then she says two different realities finally do enter the picture. Then there's a real competition for who has the truth. What do you do with that situation? You've now got a competition, and it's almost like two tennis players. The one hits the ball, then it gets hit back and forth, back and forth. What do you do with that situation? So going back, she writes, quote, "This is the thing about intimate relationships. We sign up to share our lives with someone else, and sooner or later we realize that we are also living with another person's reality, but we don't particularly want to live with our partner's reality. We just want him or her to second our own." So now I'm going to just jump out of that to page 271. Quote, "People have to learn to listen and listen and listen and listen until they finally get it, that their partner is their own inner world, that you like apples and your partner likes oranges, and that's okay. It's okay to like oranges." That's the argument you hear so often in true crime. I like apples, you like oranges, and that's okay. Actually, it's not. When you're dealing with, it's a little bit like someone saying that in a court of law, where you're trying to find out whether someone is guilty, whether someone should be sentenced for a crime, and you say, well, Judge, I like apples, and my co-counsel, my opposing counsel likes oranges. That's okay. It's okay that we disagree. No, this is a argument to find out what really happened, because there are real consequences to what really happened. In law, in true crime, there are real consequences to the reality of what has happened, and people will pay for those consequences or not pay for them. They'll go to prison for long spaces of time. They'll have reputational damage, or they won't. So it's a very big hinge that kind of hinges on, right? So to say, no, 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 this is just speculation. I say, oh, apples, you say oranges. No, 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 no. No, that's not what it is. People's lives are at stake here, and playing games with people's lives is not on. It's not acceptable. Robbie Robbins says, can you have a bowl of both? Robbie, I think you're not following what I'm trying to say. You can't go into court and sort of play it like maybe it's this, maybe it's that. You are trying to find out, did somebody commit a crime, yes or no, not yes and no. You are ultimately guilty of something, or you're not guilty of something. You can say there's a greater lack of bit of intent, but what I'm trying to say is something is either something or it's not, right? Ultimately. Um, anyway, I don't know if I'm trying to make such a basic argument. I'm not sure if it's so hard to make that argument. Anyway, she goes on to write, one of my axioms is that if you want to be in a relationship, you have to get it that you live with another person. That person isn't you. She's not merged with you. She's not your picture of who she is. She doesn't live inside your mind. She doesn't know what you're thinking, and you don't know what she's thinking. So you have to back off and move from reactivity to curiosity. Can I say that again? This is obviously in a relationship situation. Back off from reactivity to curiosity. You have to ask questions. You have to listen. So, in the same way that the scout mindset works in true crime, it also works in relationships. Don't be reactive, be curious. Don't be a soldier, be a scout, right? Does that make sense? Pepper Potts is first time participating in the chat, but long time viewer, fellow South African living in London. Thanks a lot for that. Yeah, thanks. That's a good point there. Um, so in terms of having a bowl of both, yeah, I think that's going to take me down a path I don't really want to go down. So a little bit further down the page, well, surprise, surprise, our attachment to our own sense of rightness runs deep, and our capacity to protect it from assault is cunning and fierce. It is hard, excruciatingly hard, to let go of the conviction that our own ideas, attitudes, and ways of living are the best ones. And yet, ironically, it's mainly relinquishing this attachment to rightness that is difficult and uncomfortable, not generally speaking what happens afterward. This provides a crucial clue about the origins of our desire to be right. Listen to this part. This is so important. It isn't that we care so fiercely about the substance of our claims, it is that we care about feeling affirmed, respected, and loved. Isn't that incredible? In other words, it's kind of what I've been saying for quite a long time. It's certainly the feeling I've been getting covering this particular case and trying to have rational conversations. And you find that it feels like there's a lot of lack of concern actually about the facts. And then you realize that's actually what's going on here. The facts don't matter. What matters is feeling affirmed, respected, and loved. And I would say that in one word, belonging, that I belong to this community, that I'm part of that group. And Do you see what I'm saying? So she goes on to write, the conflation of these things, wanting to be right with wanting to be valued, helps explain why disagreements within intimate relationships can feel not just like betrayal, but like rejection. That's one reason why silly squabbles over the dishes sometimes blow up into epic battles about whether our partner listens to us, understands us, and cares for us. The moral here is obvious. We can learn to live with disagreement and error as long as we feel esteemed and loved. So, jumping to the end here, what is true of a story is true of love. For either one to work, you'd better be good at talking and good at listening. Likewise, if stories only succeed when we consent to suspend disbelief, relationships requires of us something similar, the ability to let go of our worldview long enough to be intrigued and moved by someone else's. Okay, so then there's another chapter titled Transformation. There's a quote here. It is all too common for caterpillars to become butterflies and then maintain that in their youth they had been little butterflies. Quite an amazing quote. That's G.E. Valiant from Adaptation to Life. Do you want me to read that again? It is all too common for caterpillars to become butterflies and then maintain that in their youth they had been little butterflies, right? Quite interesting. So I want to go through, how many pages is it? 273 to basically this whole chapter, about 10, 20 pages, but I'm not going to obviously read it. I'm just going to touch on some of the highlights. So here we go. Nothing on these 2 pages, nothing on those 2 pages, nothing, and then here we go. So listen to, these are just kind of random things I've highlighted. This is page 279. Can you see I've written the word wow there, right? So, quoting from the chapter Transformation in the book Being Wrong, listen to the following. What makes conversion stories distinctive in the annals of wrongness is that they don't just involve repudiating a past belief in order to believe something else. Instead, they involve a wholesale change in identity. So you must bear in mind that sometimes when your beliefs in something turn out to be wrong, the stakes are damn high. It actually means that your identity is actually going to need to be transformed. Who you are as a person is going to need to be transformed. And if you think about the long process that is involved in building an identity, and I'm not saying that that process is legitimate or honest or real, but it's nevertheless a painstaking process. And nobody wants that house of cards to come down. Character is a vital line. Character is a house of cards that people spend years assembling and building up. And you may be right in pulling a card out of that house of cards. You may be right in doing that, but that person can also be completely right in saying, "Don't do that." Even if you're right, I can't handle the collapse of who I am, the collapse of what I've been able to assemble. That's also a reality. What I'm trying to say, and this is, she's kind of relating this to religion, where you believed something in the religious sense your whole life. You've been a Christian your whole life. You've been a Muslim your whole life. You've been whatever, a Buddhist your whole life. You believed in whatever your whole life. Someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I think you need to think critically. I think you need to think scientifically. I think you need to think this way or that way." But as soon as you do, you start finding your house of cards is starting to teeter, to tremble, to shake, to be undermined. That feeling of resistance to that is real and needs to be respected and appreciated. So let me read that again. What makes conversion stories distinctive, and that conversion stories where you say, "I realize I was wrong about that. I realize I wasted my time investing in these ideas and these even maybe these people, these directions, that is a kind of a knock. It's wasted time, it's wasted life. It doesn't reflect, you may feel it doesn't reflect very well on yourself, right? Of course, if you feel like, wow, I made a mistake, but I'm not going to acknowledge it just because it's too much trouble, that reflects even worse on you. But anyway, do you see what the context is here, what the scale is here in this conversion process? It's not just as simple as saying, okay, I was wrong. It's your identity that is now at stake, right? Let me read that again. What makes conversion stories distinctive in the annals of wrongness, I love the way she says that, the annals of wrongness, is that they don't just involve repudiating a past belief in order to believe something else. Instead, they involve a wholesale change in identity. That's also, I think, an aspect to think about, is a genuine repudiation means that your identity has actually got to change. You've actually got to become, to some extent, a renewed person. Your needle of your the needle that sort of goes towards or away from authenticity has actually got to make a long-term shift. If it doesn't do that, well, then it's not real, right? So if you think about the Kylie Rodney case and you think about some of the creators that have been involved in it, and you think about true crime just in general, when someone has gone off course or someone goes off track and there seems to be, what's that word for that? Contrition. They contrite. They seem to be sorry about it. They seem to realize they've made a mistake. I've actually just read someone who attacked Amber Heard who said, I've now researched this in more detail. I realize what damage I've done. That's from an article, I think, in Marie Claire. I'm going to be putting it on Patreon. But what I'm trying to say is, when you truly repudiate something, when you truly apologize, you don't just say words and you carry on with your life. A true repudiation is reflected in a change in identity. You can actually see that in the person's identity is actually a long-term change. Part of their character is actually enhanced, hopefully. Part of their identity is actually challenged, and then that's incorporated in their identity. If that doesn't happen, then the repudiation isn't real, right? That's really what they're getting at. And so when I read this and I saw that someone changing, just if you relate this to religion, someone changing their religious beliefs, where they repudiate their religious beliefs, that actually comes down to their actual identity changes. And that blew my mind. It was like, wow, that is why it's such a big freaking deal. It's a big deal to change your identity. It's a wrenching change. It's difficult. If you change your identity, your friendships change, your relationships change, your networks change, your income can also change. It's a big deal, right? So you can't change your mind about certain things lightly. That also comes with consequences. Some people might say, I don't really want those consequences. So anyway, now let's go a bit further. We now page 282. So I've just highlighted a couple of things in this book. You can just see it just sort of scrolling there. I'm just going to go through it really quickly. Buyer's, if we only experience buyer's remorse about impulsive decisions, it would not bear very deeply on wrongness. The issue at hand would be fallibility to so much impetuousness, a failure to check in with ourselves before taking action. In reality, though, we are just as likely, if not more so, to regret choices that we deliberated over at great length. So she's talking about you might make a flippant choice and rue that choice in a certain way. Or you might say, yeah, I did it impulsively, it's not a big deal. Like on Sunday, I impulsively went to go and buy pizza at a place that I never ever went to, and I nearly died. I mean, that had nothing to do with like you should not do things impulsively. But certainly it's worth thinking about. Like if I'd just gone to where I'd always gone, that wouldn't have even been an issue. Anyway, so she's saying, in reality, we are just as likely to regret choices that we deliberated over at great length. So she's saying, you might regret in a deep way a quick impulsive decision, but you could also regret something you've deliberated over at great length. Think about the Kylie Rodney case. You've deliberated over it for a long, long, long time, but you've gone in the wrong direction. You could also regret that. Then she says, the problem in buyer's remorse then isn't that we don't ask ourselves the right questions. Isn't that we don't ask ourselves the right questions about what we'll want in the future. The problem is that we don't know ourselves well enough to remain static for long enough to consistently come up with the right answer. So I think if you want to apply that directly, and you can't always fit a square peg in a round hole, and you shouldn't always try and do that. But if you want to apply that to the Kylie Rodney case, sometimes in true crime, there's a period that you must suspend judgment. You don't decide either way what something is, right? And to some extent, you can say the longer you can do that, the better. But let me give an example. The Madeleine McCann case, if you still don't know, you still haven't come up with an idea after 15 years, well, then you're a rotten investigator. So there's a certain amount of time where you don't have the information, you don't have enough to go on, and you shouldn't make a decision. But by the same token, when you have a certain amount of information, that should be enough. And that's the difference, between knowing I've got enough information, but there are unknowns, and somebody else saying either I need all the information or I need the final report, and someone who can say, yeah, but in life you often don't have that final puzzle piece. What can we say about what we do know? Some people are better than that than others. Then she goes on to write, this problem isn't limited to the future, to our aptitude or lack thereof for forecasting our emotions and convictions. As we've seen, we don't always accurately recall what we felt or believed in the past either. That's also really interesting. We may, like this chapter starts off, it says, it's all too common for caterpillars to become butterflies and then maintain that in their youth they'd been little butterflies. What that's saying is, for example, in true crime, there may be a certain belief and a certain narrative, and then the narrative changes, and then you say, yeah, but I was always a little butterfly. I actually thought that all along. Is it true? It's usually not true. We don't like to think that we make mistakes, and we don't like to investigate how we made a mistake, and so we tend to just make assumptions, which leads us to make mistakes again. So she goes on to say, sometimes we can't even accurately survey our internal landscape in the present. In other words, she's saying sometimes we are not only bad at looking at an actual landscape, and I think the Kylie Rodney case is an excellent example of people coming into an environment of trees, of water, of mountains, of the sky, of light and dark, day and night, of roads, of paths, of tracks, of all of that kind of thing, and basically getting lost in that and not really being able to navigate that very well. And I think all of us made that mistake. I did as well. You come into an ostensibly simple environment, a reservoir at a campground, right? And you overestimate your own powers of perception. You think you can see underwater when you obviously can't. You make assumptions based on the perceptions, the limited perception you do have, And then it turns out that you're not very good at reading the landscape. And then the question is, how good are you at reading your own landscape, your inner landscape? And she's saying, we're not very good at that either. And I think there's a link between being able to read, and this is what I say over and over again, there's a link between being able to effectively read the landscape, in other words, reality, and being able to read your landscape, being able to read yourself, being able to understand yourself. And that's why you must practice reading the landscape to some extent of other people, because that's going to help you read your own landscape. Being able to read your own landscape helps you live a better, happier, more authentic, more real, and hopefully more meaningful life. Stephanie, good to see you here. America True Crime says, loving the stream but got a jet. We'll finish in replay. Thanks a lot. Let's look at some of your comments. Amy says, I changed my religious beliefs a long time ago. Okay, any other comments to point out here? Karina says, I'm just witnessing this in my circle of acquaintances. Somebody not able to believe in God any longer because of the war. That person is truly changing. It is heart-wrenching to witness. B says, act in haste, repent at leisure. Okay. Any more comments worth looking at? Okay. So I'm going to try and go through these quite quickly. She writes, like wrongness itself, this idea that we can misunderstand ourselves arouses deeply conflicted feelings. Now think about that. It's one thing to be wrong about someone else or something else. How do you feel when you're wrong about yourself? And how conflicted do you feel about things you were wrong about in terms of yourself, right? The idea that you can misunderstand ourselves arouses deeply conflicted feelings. Though we all accept in the abstract that we don't know ourselves perfectly, we reliably resist the suggestion that we are wrong right now about some specific aspect of our self-understanding. And with reason, I've argued that error springs from a gap between our mental representation of something and the thing itself. So I've written here, so this is something else to highlight, page 283. She writes, I cannot understand all that I am. This means then that the mind is too narrow to contain itself entirely. But where is that part of it which it does not itself contain? Sorry, I butchered that. Where is that part of it which it does not itself contain? Is it somewhere outside itself and not within it? How then can it be part of it if it is not contained in it? The brain is wider than the sky, wrote Emily Dickinson. But as Augustine observed, it is also wider than itself. We exceed our own boundaries. We are more and other than we know ourselves to be. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of these highlights. I want to get through this. There's a, what do you call it? A reference text here. It says, if you believe that you're in love, you're in love. Even if you later come to regard that belief as madness. Quite funny. Okay, next page. We thrill to stories of life-altering change. We long to believe that such change is possible, and we do believe that it can redeem us. I just wrote wow next to that. Next page. I cannot say I changed. So this is just related to another story. What did I write here? There tore through me a transformation with the force of a river, which, dammed up and diverted for a lifetime, burst its way back to its true channel. I became what I was. I ceased to be what I was not. Then page 287, we're about 5 pages from the end. She writes, we suggest that the most homophobic guy in town is himself homosexual deep down, or when we accuse people of protesting too much, that is, disagreeing so stridently with the belief that they must secretly or subconsciously agree with it. One sort of wonders whether that's the case in this case. People that are protesting so much, that disagree so stridently, are they actually secretly or subconsciously agreeing? The idea, quoting from the middle of page 287, the idea that we possess a true self serves a hugely important psychological purpose. If we have an essential and unchanging identity, one we are destined to discover sooner or later, then the beliefs we hold, the choices we make, the person we become, none of this happens by chance. Instead, the entire course of our lives is inevitable, dictated by the certainty that our real self will eventually surface. Think about those words and this idea that we assemble ourselves purposefully, and the idea of adventures with purpose, and then this idea of an accident, that something happens where we're all paying attention, and it's not this big, intricate, important story. It's something as, in a way, silly and simple as an accident, and we miss that. There's something purposeless and meaningless about that conversation, isn't there? Karina says that's powerful, the analogy of the river. Okay, so I think is referring to communism here and says something about this narrative is appealing for the same reason that it is problematic. Within it, we can do no wrong. Our false beliefs were foreordained. Our apparent errors occurred strictly in the service of a larger truth. This idea is made explicit in the religious affirmation that God makes no mistakes, that our lives are deterministic. Then halfway through page 288, even more problematically, the idea of a true self suggests that we will never undergo momentous upheaval again. How could we? Having finally discovered who we really are and have always been, there's no further transformation available to us. If the self is constantly changing, then we can constantly feel our way forward. So, in a way, when you make a mistake, when you must transform, well, let me put it this way. When you make a mistake, it's kind of a sign, it's kind of a realization that you've got to transform who you are. And people don't like that feeling because transforming who you are is an uncertain thing, and you like to feel settled in your identity, right? You like to feel settled in your reality. But the fact is, reality is changing. Our place in reality is also changing. We must change kind of with it. Then she writes, singular, aberrational, transgressive evil. We've seen this constellation of ideas before. This is the pessimistic model of wrongness, in which error is an unwelcome anomaly, a mark of our exile from the sacred realm of truth. Helpfully, this reminds us that we have another model for making sense of wrongness as well, one that casts a different light not only on our errors, but also on ourselves. Jumping a little bit further, in the optimistic model of wrongness, error is not a sign that our past selves were failures and falsehoods. Instead, it is one of those forces, like sap and sunlight, that imperceptibly helps another organic entity, us human beings, to grow up. So I really love that. I really love the way she describes it. She's saying the optimistic model, the positive way about thinking about something kind of negative, being wrong, is it helps us to grow. It helps us to become who we are, but in a truly authentic way that is affirming, right? And I must say to you guys, some of you guys will know what I'm talking about. Some of you may not. The peach tree that has been growing in the shade is now getting so much light. It's unbelievable. It's really the sun has found it and it's finding its way to the sun as well. And it's really sort of, I don't want to say blossoming because it has blossomed, but it is really flourishing. It's really nice to see. I must also tell you that the other tree on the other side has actually thrown off some of its fruit just because it's still not in the ideal circumstances. It's still not, I guess, getting enough sun. I think it gets sun for half a day. So it's still not, even the tree that's in a better position is still not getting as much nourishing light as it needs to produce good fruit. And that I think is another metaphor here, is that you can only produce good fruit if you're in the light. So Koi Cat says, I've learned to be wrong. Stephanie says, it's embarrassing how wrong I've gotten things lately. Faith in creators. Aries Dragon says, I love more my daughter and hold her tight. This case showed me how the world, not quite sure what you're saying there, showed me how, okay, I'm not quite sure what that's about. Helen says, I'm very self-critical and so willing to always believe I'm wrong. That's kind of the other side. Yeah. Good point. Okay. Yvonne says, the question is, will we transform or stubbornly remain in our error? We don't have to change, but it is a healthy sign of self if we can when necessary. I really thought that I may have. So I'm going to take a quick time out on that point. There's a very important comment I want to raise related to that. So can you guys give me 3 minutes to, I need to email something to myself so I can show it to you guys, and I'll be back in a second. So just give me think of this as a 3-minute intermission. Okay, I'll be back in a second. Let me just, yeah, okay. Okay, thanks a lot, guys, for your patience. So I'm just trying to think what brought that about. We can chat amongst ourselves. Run for popcorn. Intermission. I just want to go to a comment that made me think about this. Can we think outside of our own machinery? Yeah, so it's this comment made by Yvonne Phillips. The question is, will we transform or stubbornly remain in our error? Now, I think this comment really addresses that. So I'm going to bring that up. Let me just do this. I just need to download it. There it is. There it is. Okay. Okay. And let's do it like that. Okay. I kind of want to keep Yvonne's question or question up there. So this was a comment made. Can you guys see that? This was a comment made today on YouTube, and I'm going to quickly read it and my response. So she writes, I've always give the benefits of the doubts, always. I've tried over and over to make sense of this. I watch various perspectives. My gut has never changed, not once. It may have been an accidental drive into the ... And so this is my response to that. My gut has never changed, not once. So my response is, that is hardly a badge of honor. Instead of rigid, stubborn, one-track thinking, I think I would also add to that anal. Just being anal, just being stubbornly stuck on one thing all the time. This case was always crying out for open, flexible, fluid thinking. That is not a coded way of saying, let's go open range on speculation and accusation. It means following the evidence in an intuitive and logical fashion. The intuition I've seen was mostly, there I did say the word, anal paranoia. The logic I've seen is hardly logical. In fact, much of the actual basis for much of one particular theory has been a flawed basis based on simple but monumental errors like getting dates wrong and not being able to read a map accurately. One wrong note can ruin a symphony, and if you're too pig-headed to check whether there is a wrong note, then that is hardly a claim worth bragging about. So that is how I think that addresses in a way what Yvonne said. Do you guys agree with that? It's a healthy sign of self if we can actually change our minds about something. It's not a badge of honor to say, I never ever changed my thinking. Do you guys agree with that? Okay. Team Peachtree. Yeah. Okay, let's just look at some of your comments. Deborah says, getting things wrong makes me want to learn about that, of which I was wrong. This can make a stronger-minded person. That's quite an interesting point. E. Caroline says, anyone else made a point of avoiding fiction? I must say, I find fiction quite hard to read, and I cannot read crime fiction anymore. Pauline Buckle says, I used to leave boyfriends before they left me, considered it a badge of honor until I saw it for what it was, fear. Okay, let's look at a couple more comments. Okay. Right, so I want to wrap up from being wrong because I really want to read writing that I think is fantastic, and that's really the part of book club that I really think is worth doing book club is coming across beautiful prose and prose that transports you. And this is actually fiction. This is a rare fiction book that I really, really enjoyed. And I actually met the author, and he's taken me out to dinner, and we were friends until we sort of lost touch. I think he lost his phone and so on, and so we kind of lost touch a bit. But if you guys buy his book, read his book, love his book, and then want me to bring him onto the show, we can maybe do that. I don't know if he's still in South Africa. I presume he is, because I think he married. It's an American who moved to who married a South African, is a lecturer at the University of Cape Town. So I presume he's still around, but I haven't seen him for probably a couple of years. So anyway, that is something to consider. Okay, so just a couple more quotes. So let me just read this again. Just such a great quote. Error is not a sign that our past selves were failures and falsehoods. Instead, it is one of those forces like sap and sunlight that imperceptibly helps another organic entity, us human beings, to grow up. Then I've highlighted here, this is page 289. Developmental psychologists have shown that children under 4 have no idea what brains do and think that dolls are as likely to possess them as humans. Most kids under 8 think that boys can become girls and girls can become boys simply by changing their hairstyle and clothing. Um, I'm not sure what this is about. I just highlighted on page 290. I think it's regarding children. So children believe in things like Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy, not because they are particularly credulous, but for the same reasons the rest of us believe our beliefs. Their information about these phenomena comes from trusted sources, typically their parents, and is often supported by physical evidence. Cookie crumbs by the chimney, quarters under the pillow. It isn't the kid's fault that the evidence is fabricated and that their sources mislead them. Interesting, isn't it? So now the penultimate page. So let me just read this. This is in the reference area. Death and reproduction are particularly common areas of confusion and error for kids, partly because so much information about these subjects is kept from them, and partly because even for adults, it's tough to fathom how we get existence from non-existence, or conversely, non-existence from existence. So well put. Such an interesting thought um, stream, right? Really interesting. Now we're on page 291. Again, I'm quoting from this book, Catherine Schultz, Being Wrong. This is chapter called Transformation. We're on page 291, and we're gonna do one more page after this. Thanks a lot, Margaret. On the whole, being wrong when we're very young is less a series of isolated incidents as we regard it in adulthood than a constant process, inextricable from learning, inextricable from growing up. Do you follow what that's getting at? It's saying when we're young, being wrong is a constant process, and that actually gets us to growing up. And growing up is kind of another way of saying being right, right? I like to think of the idea that we are constantly growing up. It's not I'm grown up, I'm there. We are constantly becoming grown-ups, hopefully. Then at the bottom of page 291, as we get older, the learning curve decelerates and all these things drop off exponentially. We make fewer mistakes, we function more efficiently, and come to share with other adults certain baseline beliefs about the world. But we also spend much less of our time in anything remotely akin to exploration, learning, and play. In other words, we spend much less time here. We abandon the scout mindset. So in a way, in true crime, you must almost approach it with the heart and mind of a child. I'm new to this world. I'm new to these people. Um, I need to learn the language. I need to learn the culture. I need to learn the dynamics. I'm new in this world. I'm a baby. I need to grow up and mature in this environment. That's going to take time, right? She goes on to write, the pleasurable mistakes of childhood disrupt our lives less often, partly because the world is less novel to us, and partly because we don't seek out whatever novelty remains, or at least we don't do so with the same zeal and the same institutional support, classrooms, after school programs, summer camps as children. Thanks a lot. Thanks for that. I love that idea of as an adult, you kind of go back to school, but not in a like a real school. You go back to school in a thought process where I love that idea. And I love that I love being able to do that with my community, to say, let's think about this. Um, let's educate ourselves in that particular area, right? I really love that idea. She goes on to say, there are exceptions, of course, long after we have left behind the error-rich kingdom of childhood. What a great way of writing that. We find ways to put ourselves in the path of wrongness in order to grow and change. Take the example of travel. Like children, travelers explore the unknown, where also like children, they routinely make linguistic errors, violate social codes, and get lost, literally and otherwise. I must say, when I traveled to Europe in 2019, I felt like a child. I made so many mistakes, couldn't say things properly, didn't know where I was, got lost. There's an element to that that is fun and exciting, and there's an element that's not fun at all, that is kind of horrible. And you realize I'm not the master of my universe. I'm not a towering giant um, of maturity. I'm kind of that grown-ups can also, in a different environment, be like children, right? Once he says, now I want to read Slaughter. Okay. So if you're feeling very confident in your powers of perception, go and travel. Go and travel to the Far East, travel to Africa, travel to South America, and you'll find out that your expertise in a different landscape doesn't count necessarily for all that much. Okay, so she also writes, we need not necessarily venture abroad to have these kinds of willing experiences of error. Sometimes the unknown places we visit are the unknown places inside of us. So a great way to challenge yourself is to travel, but you don't need to travel. You can also just do it right now. You can say, you know what, there's something inside of you that maybe you're not thinking about properly or effectively or honestly or all of those. 293, she says, we venture inward then for the same reasons we venture out, to fill in the unknown places on the map and correct our misperceptions about what's going on there. In the process, we get to know ourselves better, but ideally, we also get better selves. I love that. Absolutely love that. We end up being better selves, right? Our identities are fine-tuned, sharpened, we become better trees. The goal of therapy, after all, isn't just to help us understand why we feel and act as we do. It's also to help us change the way we feel and act, to foster a set of beliefs that is less rigid, more functional, and more forgiving towards ourselves as well as those around us. Now, midway through page 293, she writes, this is one of the most powerful ways being wrong can transform us. It can help us become more compassionate people. Being right might be fun, but as we've seen, there's a tendency to bring out the worst in us. But by contrast, being wrong is often the furthest thing in the world from fun, and yet in the end, it has the potential to bring out the best in us. Bottom of page 293. Ultimately, then, we are transformed by error through accepting it. To be judgmental, we must feel sure that we know right from wrong, and that we ourselves would never confuse the two. At the same time, it reminds us to treat other people with compassion, to honor them in their possible rightness, as well as their inevitable occasional wrongness. And then the final thing I want to highlight here, bottom of page 294. The main interest in life and work is to become someone else that you were not in the beginning. I love that. I really think that is awesome. Don't you want to change? Do you want to be the person you are right now for your whole life? Or do you want to become someone else, someone better, someone lighter, someone smarter, someone more effective? A better version of yourself in the future than you are now. Isn't that worth it? Isn't that meaningful? Right? The main interest in life and work is to become someone else that you were not in the beginning. And I must say, what is incredible about writing 100 books was the person I was at the beginning, and the thought process I had at the beginning and the thought process I had after that was totally different. I felt in myself, I became a more effective thinker. I became a more structured thinker. I became a more sensible thinker. I became a more logical and scientific thinker. And I hope I also became a better person. That out of that thinking came a kind of a softness and also a kind of a resilience. When I say softness, I don't mean weakness. I kind of mean something that's not necessarily reactionary, something that's not necessarily always reactionary. It's a softness where you say, I understand what's going on. I'm not really happy with this, but I understand what's going on, kind of thing, right? Okay, so let's tick off where we are. New books, done. Scout mindset, done. Being wrong, done. Now we're going to deal with a book that I personally don't recommend, right? I don't know if you can see that this book is like mint new. Can you see that this book has not been read? And it's a beautiful book. It's got so much endorsements, right? It's a really nice book, nice cover. I'm sure it's got thousands of reviews. It's reviewed. There's an endorsement at the back here by George R.R. Martin, right? I don't think you can almost do better than that in science fiction. There's another one from Blake Crouch, thrilling, undisputably the best book I've ever read in a very, very long time. Weir's finest work, best-selling author, and so on and so on. I'm going to read you just the first page. I'm not going to say too much about it, just that it didn't quite do it for me. That's all I'm going to say. So we're going to start with a book I don't necessarily recommend, and then a book that I do recommend. So I'm just reading the first page of chapter 1, right? I'm sure this is in the look inside section of this book. So here we go. I don't think I really got very far past this page. What's 2 plus 2? Something about the question irritates me. I'm tired. I drift back to sleep. A few minutes pass, then I hear it again. What's 2 plus 2? The soft feminine voice lacks emotion, and the pronunciation is identical to the previous time she said it. It's a computer. The computer is hassling me. I'm even more irritated now. I say. I'm surprised. I meant to say, leave me alone. A completely reasonable response, in my opinion, but I failed to speak. Incorrect, says the computer. What's 2 plus 2? Time for an experiment. I'll try to say hello. Hello, I say. Incorrect. What's 2 plus 2? What's going on? I want to find out, but I don't have much to work with. I can't see. I can't hear anything other than the computer. I can't even feel. No, that's not true. I feel something. I'm lying down. I want something soft, a bed. I think my eyes are closed. That's not so bad. All I have to do is open them. I try, but nothing happens. So that didn't work for me. That didn't work for me. So now I'm going to take you to prose that did work for me. It's from Flatwater Tuesday. It's by Ron Irwin. And I've also got to say, I love this book cover. The book cover is the font, everything is just done so beautifully. Really, really beautiful. Stephanie says, what is it about? What do you mean? What is this? What is this book about? I'm not sure. Are you referring to this book or to this book, Stephanie? Zenaida says, wow, I never saw Nick get so excited before. Okay. Oh, the Hail Mary. Okay, shall I? I think it's set in space. It's by the same guy who wrote The Martian. Um, I'll just read a little bit about the back. A lone astronaut, an impossible mission, an ally he never imagined. So I really like the idea of an astronaut alone in space, um, trying to set up a colony, almost like Interstellar. I really like that idea. I just didn't like the getting to that idea. I just never got there. So I'll read the blurb here. Ryland Grace is the sole survivor and I don't even like the name, on a desperate last chance mission. And if he fails, humanity and the earth itself will perish. Except that right now he doesn't know that. He can't even remember his own name, let alone the nature of his assignment or how to complete it. All he knows is that he's been asleep for a very, very long time, and he's just been awakened to find himself millions of miles from home with nothing but two corpses for company. So that's really it. Okay, so we're going to now read from Flatwater Tuesday, Ron Irwin, and shall I? Um, I'll read the back cover as well. Let me read that first. The son of a working class cabinet maker, Rob Carey, arrives on the prestigious Fenton School's campus with a scholarship to row on the four-man team, commonly known as the God Four. No race is more exalted than the annual. I'm actually getting goosebumps just reading this. No race is more exalted than the annual Tuesday afternoon duel against their rival school, Warwick. For months, Rob and his teammates endure grueling preparation, driven by their captain, Connor Payne's vicious competitive nature. As the race nears, the lines between dedication and obsession are increasingly blurred until no one can prevent the horrible tragedy that ensues. Now, 15 years later, a phone call from one of the God Four compels Rob to attend their 15-year reunion, and he sees the invitation as an opportunity to confront the past and perhaps even steer his own life and love in a new direction. Flatwater Tuesday shares in the grand tradition of sagas about athletic young men on the brink of greatness who either embrace their talent or are devastatingly consumed by it. As much about the art of rowing as it is a novel of finding oneself, this is a memorable and deeply moving testament to what it means to train and fight for both love and victory in sport and in life. Don't laugh, but just reading those words, I just want to cry. I just think it's so powerful, well done. What a triumph of writing. It's really good to see. So Ron Owen, there's a picture of him at the back. right over there. You can go to ronerwin.com, but Ron Irwin was born and raised in Buffalo, New York, and attended boarding school and college in New England, where he was a member of a number of winning rowing crews. So this is, I guess, partly autobiographical. He's currently the writing residence for the University of Cape Town's MA in Creative Writing program, where he's taught since 1999. It is a kind of rite of passage novel. It's a kind of Dead Poet Society book, but it's its own story. Okay, so are you guys ready to kind of read from it? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read one page, and then I'm going to just touch on a couple of things I've highlighted, right? So this is page 3, it's chapter 1. There is a introduction and a prologue. I'm not going to read that. This is for me the thing I wanted to get to in this TCRS book club. This to me is the highlight, right? Mel Stiller says she's ready. Are you guys ready? Let's take a drink of water. My fragile rowing shell was moving fast and light down the river. It surged forward, then coasted while I recoiled for another stroke. I felt the pull of the sculls in my legs, then in my back. I heard only the splashing and the zing of the water dripping from the blades as I slipped by the ancient school. The endless lawns to starboard turned into soccer fields and then into the practice football field. The freshly painted goalpost marked the end of my practice session, and passing them, I tasted my speed, closed my eyes, and inhaled it, the vibrations of the boat in my spine. I leaned back, and the shell ran out beneath me, gliding over the water like a bird. A million trees up, the mountain threw rippled reflections across the water. The blades of my sculls kissed the smooth surface as I neared the Fenton School boathouse. I could turn and see the dock floating 4 inches above the waterline. Even this late in the season, I could feel the heat rising up off the banks, as if the valley had kept part of the summer's warmth for the fall. I hunched over and drew a stopwatch from my sweatshirt and did the daily math, looking at the digital numbers through watery eyes. The calculations were easy. I knew how far 2,000 meters was down the course, and I allowed some time because you rode with the current to get down the river and fought it coming back. I was shaving off seconds, all right. I had a notebook stowed under the foot stretchers, and I pulled it out after I slid off the boat's sliding seat onto the dock. I flattened the pages on my damp thighs to pencil in my new times, saw the improvement and shut the book fast, slid it in the waistband of my rowing trunks. I flipped the scull out of the water to my shoulders, then settled it on my head and waited while it dripped, balancing, my body the fulcrum as the boat gently teeter-tottered against my scalp. Holding the boat steady with my left hand wrapped around a rigger, I bent my knees and picked up the sculls with my right, straightened. I bent my knees and picked up the sculls with my right, straightened, and began the careful walk up to the boathouse. When I had negotiated the 57 steps to the dark entrance, I aimed the bow into the straps hanging from the rafters within, then strapped in the stern. I popped open the deck plate and used a crusty, grease-stained towel to wipe the river water from the hull. I pulled the ropes that raised the boat to where it settled into a sliver of reflection in the gloom and tied up, still a little out of breath. I set the skulls upright in their wooden rack and pulled the great sliding door shut. As I streamed my way through the clear early morning cold of fall toward the school, my knees would start to ache by the time I reached the first buildings. The muscles in my back would tighten and my fingers would begin to burn. It didn't matter because thinking about the times in that notebook, I believed I had an edge. And then that's sort of there's a sort of interruption there with that marker, and it's actually an or. Can you see that? I just love the deft touches in this book. It's just so well done, so beautiful, such a wonderful entry into another world. I really love that. It's done so well. Um, Perfect Imperfection says, this is my first time in this live chat in a long time, and I must admit I'm really enjoying the relaxed and mature environment. Thanks a lot for that. Yeah, that's exactly it. So I'm just gonna. I wish I could read further, but you must go and buy the book, Flatwater Tuesday by Ron Irwin. I'm just going to highlight a couple of um, sentences. So page 15, he just writes, "My lungs felt raw." Have you ever thought of that? Have you ever heard that referred to in that way? My lungs felt raw. Then he also writes on page 18, "The sun caught him full in the face. His skin was impossibly pale. In profile, his nose was almost a perfect triangle. He was perhaps an inch taller than me, but I must have had him by 10 pounds. He had long, sinewy limbs, a shock of blonde hair, coarse hair like an animal's." Then a little bit lower down, he shook his head, grinned. He had a salesman's smile. It made you look like him, even if you knew it would cost you. He surveyed the river and the buildings and the road into town and even the mountains beyond the school, inspecting it all as if he owned it. From chapter 2, he talks about the uncompromising demand of the past for an undefeated present. And then I think the last thing I want to read here is where he says, and this is page 37. You can see I've written over here, good tension. Can you see that over there? Good tension. So he writes the following. "She looked me up and down one last time. I should have reached for her then. She would have let me, but I hesitated and the moment was gone." Just a really good book. I've barely scratched the surface. I'm not going to read any more of it, but I think you've gotten the idea. It's really worth it. So it did make me think when I saw this book, I really need to get hold of Ron again and see where he is and get in touch with him again. Okay, let's have a look. Sharon says this book is scary. Helena says it makes me think my brother should write a book. He won a gold medal in the Olympics as an underdog. Wow, I didn't know that. In what sport? Ron also told me that he sold the movie rights to this book. I just don't know what happened to that. I don't know where it went. But when we last spoke, he'd actually sold the movie rights, which is a big deal for any writer. It's a big achievement. Okay, so we're going to conclude now with a review that to me is the most hurtful and painful review I think I've ever received. And it's for this book, Slaughter. Okay, so we're going to go down. You can see it's not rated very high, 2.6 out of 5. And that I believe is also one of my best books, this one as well. Incel. Also got virtually no reviews. So you can see this is regarded as the top review from the United States, top review, and it's from 3 years ago. Not worth your time. So I'm going to read this review and then we'll look at something else. Okay. So I think before we deal with Slaughter, the review of it, let me tell you a little bit about the book. The book is about at least 8 mass shooters. It includes Nicholas Cruz, who's kind of on trial right now, the sentencing phase. But at least 7 other high profile mass shooters, Stephen Paddock and many others, the Aurora shooter, anyway, so the Boston bombers, basically I chose 8 of some of the highest profile mass shootings, the Sandy Hook as well, and I basically profiled mass shooters, and I felt like I had really in a way discovered the holy grail in terms of in a true crime subgenre, right? And you're going to hear about that, and you're going to hear about someone disparaging that and saying, well, this is crap. What this guy came up with is total crap. So let me just say the following. When I wrote this book, I actually feel like I was on top of my game, because writing about one crime means you write about one crime scene. When you write about mass shooters the way I did, you are dealing with a huge crime scene. You're dealing with many victims, and you've got to deal with each of those in a kind of microscopic way. And if you deal with one mass shooting, that's hard enough. But you deal with one and another one and another one. Each time you've got to profile the mass shooter. Each time you've got to get to know the environment and get to know that crime scene. It's an incredible amount of work. And the Boston bombing story was one of the hardest, because the crime scene is so spread out. There's sort of an incident and then an aftermath that happened somewhere else. It just sucked up so much. It drew so much just to accurately tell that story. I then went on and did something similar in this book, Incel Cause and Effect, right? And there I dealt with Elliot Rodger, and that crime scene is also a huge and kind of complicated crime scene. And then I also spoke again about Nicholas Cruz and others. So let's read this this review. The author's narrative style is pretty good, but as far as content, there's really nothing of value here. The author attributes rampaging mass murder to anxiety and anality, and I think that should be bases, B-A-S-E-S. Bases his conclusions almost entirely on news coverage, Wikipedia articles, and the work of 20th century anthropologist Ernest Becker. The author concluded no primary research the author conducted no primary research, nor does it appear that he even bothered reading any of the multitudes of journal articles published in peer-reviewed journals about the subject. I think I need to go and get my reading glasses. My eyes are kind of hurting. Give me 30 seconds. Let me just quickly go and get them. Okay. Then in the next paragraph, he says, in the beginning of the book, he makes the bold claim of having developed a profile for the mass shooter, but that is far from true. He says that mass murderers suffer from severe anxiety, which is certainly true for most, but not universally so. So already there, I don't really like, I mean, he's contradicting himself. He says, he makes a bold claim. He says mass murderers suffer from severe anxiety. That's true, but it's not always true. Oh, okay, isn't it? Anyway, he says Eric Harris's journal, one of the Columbine shooters, shows no evidence that he suffered from severe anxiety, unless you interpret anxiety very loosely. Yeah, well, unless you do. And even if all mass shooters suffered from severe anxiety, it does not constitute a profile. Oh, doesn't it? Everyone suffers from anxiety at some point or another, and even severe cases very rarely lead to murder, much less mass murder. Now, just to address what he's saying there is extreme anxiety, like Dahmer experienced, extreme anxiety, like the kind of anxiety Jeffrey Dahmer experienced, which also comes from anality, manifests as a kind of sadism, right? So if you don't understand and you don't appreciate the amount of anxiety, and this is in terms of I'm anxious because I'm alone, I'm anxious because I'm isolated, I'm frustrated because I'm a teenager and all these people are superseding me, right? That's part of the story. If you dismiss that because you're not a teenager yourself or whatever, you just don't have that ability to use your intuition, then all of this goes completely over your head. So think about Jeffrey Dahmer. We spoke about him yesterday. Think about he was a anxious person, and that's why he couldn't handle someone, a living person next to him. He couldn't have relationships with anyone. And so the same profile that applies to Jeffrey Dahmer applies to, in other words, a serial killer like him, applies to these mass shooters. You are doing something because you're so anxious that you are dysfunctional, and you apply that dysfunctional aspect, which is so anal, in a sadistic way, right? And this person totally disagrees with it and says it's totally wrong, it's totally false, it's not applicable at all. Then he says the second part of his profile is the presence of what he calls anality in the shooter, and often in the society and or family of which the perpetrator is a part. It is such a major part of the profile he developed that the words anal, anality, or analympics appear 243 times in his book. The problem with this is that the word anal is a pop psychology term used to describe a rigid kind of personality. It is derived from the term anal retentive, which I think this guy's just Googled, which derives from Freud's long since discredited theories on psychological development. All that aside, if we take his use of the word anal as referring to an unusually rigid personality, then people with OCD would be poster children for school shooters. They are, after all, extremely anal and prone to high levels of anxiety. But other than Adam Lanza, I've yet to hear of any other school shooter having OCD. So I must say, I think Adam Lanza is a great example of, do you think he was anxious? Do you think Adam Lanza was an anxious kid? Then he says, instead of wasting your time and money on this tripe, I would instead recommend Rampage, the social roots of school shootings by Harvard sociologist Catherine Newman and Why Kids Kill by Peter Langman. They provide a serious analysis of the complicated psychology behind the phenomenon of school shootings, something which is non-existent in this book. So there are a couple of reasons I am so unhappy with this review. One is that it's obviously written by someone who's not a total idiot. Another one is that in the middle of his review, he recommends another book. Don't read this book, read somebody else's. And he makes quite a good argument for, although a very facile argument, for why my argument is tripe, basically, right? He makes quite a good argument that Freud's theories have been discredited. In a general sense, I wouldn't say everything of Freud is useless. And what is particularly frustrating is that he seemed to miss the boat in terms of, this is talking about extreme anxiety, like when you are a teenager and a young man and you are failing at life, that kind of existential anxiety, which totally goes over this guy's head, right? And so on and so on. And so it's also very upsetting that this is regarded as the top review, right? So something else just to draw your attention to, this book is 521 pages. I think it's the longest book I've ever written. So I put a heck of a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into writing this book. And so it ends up, despite all of that effort into this book, it's rated poorly and reviewed pretty much poorly. And I must say, I still don't really like what I've written here. I feel like I need to rewrite it, but I just haven't really done that. These are kind of a list of those that I covered: Cruz, Paddock, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, Adam Lanza, James Holmes. And then I also went sort of to overseas sources, a shoot in Finland and in Russia as well. And then I also did that one, Virginia Tech, right? So anyway, that is I think the review that upsets me the most of any of the reviews I've ever gotten. Partly it's the prominence of this review in a book that I really care about, and partly it is the apparent sensibility of the reviewer, right? And I feel like a lot of people read this review and decided, you know what, I agree with him, I'm not going to even read the book. That's kind of the feeling that I got. So Yvonne says, Nick has answered the question as to the motive of mass shooters. Thanks a lot for that. No, I don't think I struck a nerve. I don't think I did. Pauline says, I don't think the review is actually familiar with Sigmund Freud or Ernest Becker. He's a pseudo-intellectual. Yeah. So that's a horrible review. I'm going to read to you two other reviews now. So here's another one, terrible writer. And let's read this one. From Dan F. Nick is on target. So this guy writes, I've enjoyed several books written by Mr. Van der Leek. I like his writing style and the links he provides with the Kindle format. They're helpful. He provides insightful analysis. This is the part that is important. I've been a cop for more than 33 years, and I've had many opportunities to observe human behavior. I believe he's spot on. Keep it up. That really means something to me. I've been a cop for 33 years. This guy knows what he's talking about. So here's another one, scary and terribly sad, but very well put together. So he writes, I haven't finished reading this book, but I don't have to say that Slaughter is powerful and scary and terribly, terribly sad and very well put together. To be read in increments as much as you can at a time with frequent breaks so as to properly digest all the material. Maybe we can all learn something from Nick's Profiles of Mass Shooters, a very courageous book. Then there's this one. It began with an article about Stephen Paddock that led me to delve more into the author's perspective on someone who seemed to defy explanation. Mr. van der Leek not only provided an unexpectedly insightful explanation, but led the reader through this process of discovery that was absolutely brilliant. The rise of serial killers in our American culture is reaching unbelievable pandemonium, and this book provides clues needed to help find real solutions to a very real crisis. Taking a critical look at the behavior without the cloud of politics is necessary for this to happen. Let law enforcement, health professionals, school administrators, parents, and anyone else concerned about what is happening to our society use this book as part of their or our discussion for change. It's that good. So that I really appreciated some of these reviews, but it hasn't been enough to shift the that rating. So the other thing to bring up about this book was I wrote The Murder of Vincent Van Gogh immediately after writing this book. So basically what happened was after I wrote Slaughter, right? Let me just bring it up like this. After I wrote Slaughter, I was really exhausted. It really was like drawing a pound of flesh out of me. I was really worn out, worn down, psychologically exhausted. And in the aftermath to that, while I was sort of relaxing, while I was trying to just sort of recharge, I just started watching some Vincent van Gogh documentaries. And that was what got me on to Loving Vincent, that animated documentary. And so I was really wanting to rest and recover. And after this huge book that had just been taken so much out of me, when I stumbled onto this epiphany on Vincent van Gogh, and I was like, cheapers, he was murdered. He didn't commit suicide. And so, as I say, personally, my personal opinion was I was on the top of my game when I wrote this book, which then led me to writing The Murder of Vincent van Gogh, which I think is one of my best books. I think possibly my biggest contribution to true crime. Basically this book and that book. And then I also think that this is a very important book that also took a lot out of me, this one, Cause and Effect. In a way, I actually think parts of the execution of this book are even better than Slaughter, because I'd already learned how to do that, and so I did it again. Let's just see how long this book is. It's not really that long, 173 pages, but I mostly dealt with Elliot Rodger in this story. I mostly dealt with one particular incel, right? So it was a bit easier to write in that sense. Thanks a lot for that, Yvonne. Thanks a lot for that. Deborah says, sorry, I accidentally pressed something. I'm going to buy Slaughter and enjoy the heck out of it. I don't know if it's a book that you can enjoy. Like one of the reviewers said, it is a very heavy material. It's a bit like watching Dharma. You can only read it in increments. It's it's deeply troubling, and it's very heavy material, and you go from the one to the next. And so also it's a long book. It's over 500 pages. So it's you're going to need to read and refresh, read and take a break, kind of thing. Stephanie says, lovely chat. I've got to take my son to robotics. We'll watch all when I get back. Thanks for joining us here, Stephanie. Lady Amalthea says, that's mine. Oh, really? Okay, that's awesome. So this is her review. Let's bring it up quickly, just to quickly show you guys. That's your review. So can I ask you, did you read my blog about Stephen Paddock? Because I wrote a blog about him, and that also kind of led to that. Did you read my blog, or was it a separate article that you read? Just interested to know. But thanks very much for your review, Lady Amalthea. Oh, you did? Okay, that's cool. Okay. Wow, Lady Amalthea says that was the next book I read, The Murder of Vincent Van Gogh. Loved it. Those are my three favorites, the three I mentioned. Van Gogh was like going down a rabbit hole every other page. Well, I must say, this puts me in such a good mood. It's really nice engaging with a reader who got it. Like, you know, I was trying to communicate something and you received the message. It's a really nice feeling. Really appreciate that. I must say, sometimes you feel, just in a general sense, misunderstood, misrepresented, mistreated. And it's nice to know that, well, it's not by everybody, that there are some people who do appreciate you, do understand you, do like what you're saying, but in the sense that it's true, right? I see the reality in what you are shining a light on, right? Okay. Les Brown says a presentation that quotes from Star Trek's The Galileo 7 contains material on how to be a better person and more, and all at an intellectual level. Okay. Deborah says, Nick, you don't just write, you put your whole self 1000% into your writing. That is why you are exhausted after finishing each book. That is absolutely it. That is absolutely it. Karina says, it took a long time to read and absorb. Thanks a lot for that, Karina. Alina says, everyone wants to know why these mass shootings occur and continue. You are extremely brave to try and tackle the question. It was, I felt that I had to draw on a lot to tell the story. Definitely, definitely. Thanks a lot, Perfect Imperfection. Good luck with your mommy duty. All the best. Okay, so we had 2 hours, 8 minutes. I think we're going to call it at this point. Cool. So yeah, if you guys want to read Slaughter, it's you can follow this link. We put it in again. If you guys are watching the replay, obviously you can just Google Slaughter and the rest of the title, part of the rest of the title. You can just Google Slaughter Profiles of the Deadliest Massacres and maybe my name, and it should come up on Amazon. If you still can't find it, let me know in the comments and I'll put the link there. This is also, I think, quite well done. Someone actually offered to sort of do a documentary on this particular book. That's how much that appealed to them, or they thought it was well written. Les Brown, thanks a lot for that. Mel says, did you have a question for me? Not sure if I did. Did I have a question? Cindy says, I sometimes see you as a researcher searching for a cure. Thanks so much for your deep dives. I'm feeling like I'm looking for a cure for, in a basic way, in a foundational way, in a fundamental way, for our problem, our difficulty dealing with reality. Like, I feel like human beings struggle to deal with reality in a general sense. and it's the result. It creates so much pain and problems. Just that one thing. If we could do that, we could be so much happier as a society, as individuals, as you know, both of those. That's what you said when this live started. I can't remember what the first thing is that you said in the beginning. I think you said apples and oranges or something. Anyway, Pauline says, thanks, guys. I must leave now. Thanks for being here, Pauline. Also, thanks, really thanks for reading the book and sharing your experience of reading it. I really appreciate that. Thanks a lot, Perfect Imperfection. Sorry, Mal, still, I'm not sure what that's about. Yvonne says, sorry, I can't leave a super chat. I have a wedding and taxes to pay. Okay, no, well, it's good to have you here. Zenaida says, thanks for your live with us. Okay. Okay. Oh, was that not you? I can't remember who did say that. Who said something about apples and oranges? So let me know in the comments if you're watching this on replay. Do you want me to ask Ron Irwin to come onto the show? I'll ask him. I don't know if he will, but there's no harm in trying. Also, do you guys have any suggestions for what you want me to cover in the next TCRS book club? So think about that. Patrons, think about that. I also think about that. What do you guys want to deal with in the next book club? Do you want to deal with sport, kind of almost like sport self-help or sport-related writing that I really like? Do you guys want to talk about Richard Dawkins, possibly, and some of those writers? Let me know. Thanks a lot, Deborah. Karina says, please ask him. Okay, so I will try and get hold of him and see what he says. So I'm going to log off here. I actually would have been probably 20 minutes later if I finished editing the video that I was working on. So I'm going to finish with that now, and you guys can look out for that. Basically, there's a big breaking news story right now on Madeleine McCann. Anyway, I'll put that out quite soon, so look out for that. Elizabeth says, I'll definitely be reading your book, Slaughter. I'll be checking my dashboard because it shows when people buy the book. I'll be checking to see if there's a sale. So I'll check that out. Okay, thanks very much, everyone who was here, and I'll see you guys next time. All the best. See you.